He thought it was just another night on set until Keanu Reeves found a terrified boy hiding in a warehouse, chased by a ruthless Mexican gang. With no police to trust and danger closing in, Keanu had one choice: risk everything to save a stranger. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The Arizona desert was silent after sunset, except for the low hum of generators fading behind the movie set. Keanu Reeves walked alone down a dirt path, his boots crunching against the gravel. The filming had wrapped late that night, and most of the crew had already left for the motel. He preferred the quiet, those long, reflective walks that cleared his head after a day of intense acting. The horizon still glowed faintly orange from the dying light, and the air carried the dry scent of sand and rust. As he passed an abandoned warehouse, a faint sound stopped him cold. It wasn't the usual groan of wind through broken metal or the chirp of a desert bird. It was softer, almost human. A small whimper, like someone trying not to cry. He froze, listening. Then it came again, muffled and uneven. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong out here, miles from town. Keanu stepped closer to the warehouse. The metal siding was covered in graffiti, the windows shattered, and the large doors hung slightly open. He hesitated, feeling that familiar pull between reason and instinct. Maybe it was an animal, he thought. Or maybe someone was hurt. Either way, he couldn't just walk away. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The smell of dust and motor oil hit him first. The inside was dimly lit by a broken skylight where the moonlight poured in faint streaks. Old crates and machinery were scattered everywhere, remnants of some forgotten industry. Keanu moved quietly, scanning the shadows. That's when he saw movement behind a stack of wooden boxes. Something small, trembling. He crouched low and called softly, "Hey, it's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." A boy emerged slowly, no older than 13. His face was streaked with dirt, his clothes torn. One of his cheeks was bruised purple, and his dark eyes darted toward the door as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. He clutched a small backpack tightly to his chest, like it was the only thing he had left in the world. Keanu kept his voice gentle. "My name's Keanu. What's yours?" The boy didn't answer. His lips trembled, and his chest rose and fell too quickly. Keanu noticed a cut on his arm, still fresh. "You're hurt," he said softly, taking a cautious step forward. The boy flinched and shook his head. Then, from outside, the distant roar of motorcycle engines shattered the silence. The boy's head snapped toward the sound, panic flooding his face. He whispered something in Spanish, almost too fast to catch. Keanu didn't understand all the words, but he caught one pandilla, gang. The sound grew louder, more engines. Voices yelling mixed with laughter that sounded cruel. Keanu quickly looked around the warehouse for a hiding spot. The boy backed into the shadows, clutching his backpack tighter. Keanu followed him behind a line of crates near the far wall, crouching low. "Stay quiet," he whispered. The boy nodded, tears welling in his eyes. Outside, the gang's motorcycles screeched to a stop. The engines cut off one by one, leaving only the thumping sound of boots hitting the ground. Someone kicked a metal door. Another voice shouted in Spanish, angry and mocking. Keanu felt his pulse quicken, but his mind stayed calm. He had been in dangerous situations before, though never quite like this. The boy pressed himself closer, trembling uncontrollably. Keanu could feel the fear radiating. Off him raw, desperate, human fear. He placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're safe for now," he murmured. "We'll figure this out." The warehouse door groaned open wider. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, sweeping across the floor. The gang members had entered. Keanu could hear their boots scraping, their voices echoing off the metal walls. They were searching. "Donde estás, muchacho?" One of them called. "You can't hide forever." Keanu crouched lower. Motioning for Miguel, he'd caught the name from the taunts to stay down. His heart pounded, but his breathing stayed slow and even. He had no weapon, no plan, just his instincts and the space between breaths. One of the flashlights flickered across the ceiling, then along the floor, inching closer to their hiding spot. The beam stopped for a moment on a crate nearby, then moved again. Keanu could see the reflection glinting off a piece of glass beside them. He carefully shifted his hand to cover it, preventing the light from catching it again. The voices grew louder. One man laughed harshly. Another cursed. A metal pipe clanged as someone kicked it aside. The sound echoed like thunder in the empty building. The boy flinched, gasping quietly. Keanu's hand tightened on his shoulder in silent reassurance. Then one of the men shouted something that made the others go silent. The light turned toward their direction. Keanu's eyes narrowed. He knew they were seconds away from being discovered. The beam of light froze on the crates only a few feet away. Dust sparkled in the air, and every sound in the warehouse seemed to vanish. Keanu didn't move. Neither did the boy. The man holding the flashlight stepped closer, muttering under his breath. Keanu could see his outline, now broad shoulders, leather jacket, a pistol tucked into his belt. Another man joined him, whispering something sharp and impatient. The leader barked an order, and both began overturning boxes. The crash of splintering wood made Miguel flinch violently. Keanu leaned close and whispered so softly it was barely sound. "Look at me, not them. Breathe slow." The boy tried, his chest heaving as he fought for control. The flashlight beam suddenly swept over the next row. It stopped for a second on the top of their crate, inches from their faces. Keanu reached up slowly and tipped a broken plank forward, sending a loud creak echoing through the far side of the warehouse. Instantly, both men spun toward the noise, shouting. It worked. They ran toward the sound, kicking through debris, believing someone had slipped that way. Keanu exhaled, but only once. "We move now," he whispered. He took Miguel's hand and guided him across the floor, keeping low. The boy's small fingers clung tightly to his. They slipped behind a row of rusted machinery near the back door. The motorcycles outside still idled faintly, casting long shadows through the doorway. The leader's voice echoed again, furious. "Find him. He's close." Keanu pulled the door open an inch, letting the cold desert air rush in. He looked back once the flashlights were getting closer again. Then he whispered the only words that mattered. "Run when I tell you." Keanu pushed the door open wider, and they slipped into the night. The desert air was dry and sharp, carrying the faint scent of gasoline from the motorcycles. The moonlight stretched long across the sand, exposing every movement. They couldn't run too fast or they'd draw attention, so they crept low, keeping the warehouse at their backs, the darkness their only ally. Behind them, angry shouts exploded. The men had realized their prey was gone. Engines roared to life again, lights flashing through the open doorway. Keanu's pulse quickened. He glanced to his left. An old water tower stood near a cluster of fences and storage tanks. It was the only cover in sight. "This way," he whispered. Miguel nodded, barely able to breathe. They dashed toward the tower. Gravel crunched underfoot. Too loud, too risky. Keanu guided the boy behind one of the tanks, crouching just as two motorcycles sped past, their lights slicing through the darkness. Dust rose in clouds, stinging his eyes. He waited until the noise faded, then looked down at Miguel. The boy was shaking, but his eyes were alive with determination. He clutched the rosary around his neck and whispered, "Gracias." Keanu gave a faint nod. "You're doing great. We just need to keep going." He scanned the open field ahead, a few hundred yards of desert before the next road. Beyond that lay safety, or at least a chance. Behind them, the gang circled back toward the warehouse, still searching. Keanu knew they didn't have much time. He placed a steadying hand on Miguel's shoulder. "When we move again, we don't stop, no matter what you hear." The boy nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I trust you." And for the first time that night, Keanu smiled. The desert stretched endlessly under a bruised purple sky. the kind of stillness that hides danger in every shadow. Keanu led Miguel through the back of the warehouse, guiding him along a narrow path littered with rusted barrels and weeds that cracked underfoot. The boy stumbled once, too weak to walk straight. Keanu caught him by the arm before he fell. "Easy," he whispered. "We're almost clear." Miguel's breathing came in short gasps. His thin frame trembled from exhaustion and fear. His sneakers, torn at the soles, dragged across the gravel. Every few steps, he looked back, expecting to see the glare of headlights or hear the roar of engines. But for now, the desert was quiet. They reached the edge of the field behind the warehouse, where the land sloped down toward a cluster of lights in the distance, a small, rundown motel off the highway. Keanu's driver, an older man named Carl, was waiting there with the car. It couldn't have been more than a mile away. But out here, under the wide sky, it felt endless. "Can you make it?" Keanu asked softly. Miguel nodded weakly. "See." They started down the slope. Each step kicked up a puff of dust that caught the moonlight. The night air was cool, but Keanu could feel sweat on the back of his neck. He kept glancing toward the motel, where a faint figure leaned against a car under the flickering sign. Carl was smoking a cigarette, unaware of the danger heading their way. Halfway across the field, Miguel stopped suddenly. He froze, his eyes wide, staring over Keanu's shoulder. Keanu turned just in time to see two beams of light cut through the darkness behind them. Headlights. Engines roared to life. Two trucks burst over the hilltop, their lights blazing across the desert like hunting eyes. The gang had found their trail. Keanu's heart jumped, but his mind stayed sharp. He grabbed Miguel's hand. "Run!" They sprinted toward the motel. The boy's small legs pumped furiously, but he was no match for the roaring engines closing the gap. The trucks hit the field fast, kicking up a storm of dust and gravel. "Over there!" Keanu pointed toward a wooden fence and a dark structure beyond it, a corral. The faint shapes of horses moved inside, restless under the noise. They ducked behind the fence just as bullets cracked through the air. Keanu shielded Miguel, pressing him low to the ground. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice calm but urgent. The truck skidded to a stop not far from the corral, engines growling. Keanu's mind raced. He couldn't outrun them, and he wouldn't fight them not with the child beside him. He needed another way. His eyes caught the horses again, 5 of them, shifting nervously, their silhouettes barely visible in the moonlight. And then the idea came. He crawled to the latch of the corral gate and whispered, "When I say go, you run straight to the road. Don't stop for anything." Miguel looked confused, but nodded. Keanu gripped the latch, took a breath, and pulled it open. The moment the latch clanged open, the corral erupted into chaos. Startled by the gunfire and headlights, the horses bolted into the open field. Their hooves thundered across the ground, shaking the dry earth. Dust exploded into the air, blinding the gang members as they shouted in confusion. Keanu grabbed Miguel's arm. "Now!" he said, pulling him up from the dirt. They sprinted through the storm of movement, weaving between the fleeing animals. The air filled with the sound of hooves and shouting. A horse reared just beside them, nearly knocking Keanu over, but he ducked and pulled Miguel forward, his grip unyielding. The boy stumbled once but kept running, his breath ragged, his eyes wide with fear. Behind them, the gang members cursed and tried to regain control of the situation. One fired a shot into the air, and the sound sent the horses in every direction. The headlights flickered in the dust clouds, making it impossible for the men to see clearly. Keanu used the chaos to his advantage, leading Miguel along the edge of the corral and toward the dirt road that ran parallel to the motel. The boy tripped again. Keanu scooped him up without hesitation, carrying him across the uneven ground. The weight barely slowed him down. Years of training for action roles had built endurance, but this wasn't acting. This was survival. As they neared the road, Keanu spotted Carl standing beside the car, cigarette forgotten, eyes wide with alarm. He shouted, "Get the engine running!" Carl didn't ask questions. The engine roared to life just as Keanu reached the passenger side. He opened the back door and helped Miguel in, slamming it shut behind him. Then he climbed into the front seat. "Go!" Carl hit the gas. The tires spun, throwing gravel before catching grip. The car shot forward, headlights cutting through the dust. Behind them, the trucks were still lost in the chaos of the stampede, their drivers blinded by flying sand and panicked animals. Miguel sat curled in the back seat, clutching his backpack against his chest, his breathing shallow. Keanu turned halfway to look at him. "You're safe now. Just breathe." The boy's lips quivered. He nodded, his eyes glistening with tears that he refused to let fall. Carl glanced over, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "What the hell's going on, Keanu? Who's the kid?" Keanu shook his head. "I'll explain later. Just keep driving." They sped down the desert highway, the night swallowing them whole. The chaos behind began to fade, replaced by the rhythmic hum of the tires on asphalt. But Keanu didn't relax. He knew it wasn't over. Somewhere out there, the gang would regroup. They'd come again. He looked at Miguel through the rearview mirror. The boy was still shaking, his small fingers wrapped tight around that worn rosary. Keanu's voice was steady, almost whispering. "We'll get you safe, kid. I promise." The car sped through the night, the highway stretching endlessly ahead, silver under the pale light of the moon. The desert on either side looked like an ocean of shadows. Miguel sat silent in the back seat, staring out the window, his small frame trembling from exhaustion. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by the hollow ache of fear. Keanu kept glancing at the side mirror. Nothing yet, but he knew better than to trust silence. The gang wouldn't stop until they were sure the boy was gone or dead. "How far to the motel?" Keanu asked quietly. "About 6 minutes," Carl replied. "Maybe less if I push it." Keanu nodded. "Keep it steady. No lights for now." Carl flicked off the headlights, driving by the faint glow of the moon and the dim orange lights from the distant highway. The car moved like a ghost through the desert, barely a sound except the hum of the engine. Then, from behind, a distant flicker appeared. 2 lights. Headlights. Keanu felt it. Immediately. "They're coming," he said. Carl cursed under his breath. "You've got to be kidding me." The lights grew larger, bouncing on the uneven road. Keanu turned back toward Miguel, who met his eyes in the rearview mirror. The boy's voice was barely audible. "They don't stop. They will," Keanu said softly. "They always do when they lose what they think they own." Ahead, the motel sign came into view, a broken neon glow that buzzed faintly in the dark. Carl pressed harder on the gas. "Hold on." The car flew down the last stretch of the road. Keanu looked toward a wooden fence to the left of the motel. Beyond it, he saw the open desert again and a row of weathered barns. He could already plan the next move if the gang closed in places to hide, maybe a way to disappear completely. They pulled into the dirt lot behind the motel. Carl cut the engine. The only sound now was the ticking of the hot motor cooling. Miguel whispered, "They'll find us." Keanu turned in his seat and looked him straight in the eyes. His tone was calm, his words deliberate. "Not tonight." The boy nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. Trust, fragile but real. Keanu leaned back, scanning the horizon one more time. The headlights that had haunted them were gone. Maybe they'd shaken them, or maybe they were only hiding in the dark. Either way, Keanu knew the night was far from over. The motel was quiet, a forgotten place where the walls were thin and the lights buzzed with the sound of dying electricity. Keanu closed the curtains and double-checked the lock before turning toward Miguel, who sat on the edge of the bed, still shaking. The boy's face was pale under the flickering light, and his small hands trembled as he held the edge of his backpack like it was a lifeline. Keanu walked to the small sink, filled a cup with water, and handed it to him. "Drink," he said softly. Miguel hesitated, then took it with both hands, sipping carefully. The water steadied him a little. Keanu grabbed a protein bar from his jacket pocket and offered it next. The boy looked at it, uncertain, before hunger won over fear. He unwrapped it slowly and took small bites, his jaw quivering as if even chewing took effort. Keanu sat down in the chair beside the bed, elbows on his knees. He didn't speak for a while. The silence was calm, deliberate, giving the boy space to breathe. When Miguel finally looked up, Keanu asked quietly, "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Miguel's eyes darted toward the door, then back to Keanu. His voice came out cracked and small. "They'll find me." "Not tonight," Keanu replied. "You're safe here. I promise." The boy swallowed hard, looking down at his hands. "They call themselves Los Cazadores," he said finally. "The Hunters." Keanu nodded slowly, recognizing the name. He'd heard of them during his charity trips near the border. A gang known for smuggling and fear, one that turned children into pawns. "They came to my town," Miguel continued. "They wanted us to carry things across the hills, packages. They said it was easy money." His voice faltered. "I told them no." Keanu leaned forward, his eyes fixed on him. "And then?" "They beat me," Miguel whispered. "They said if I didn't do it, they'd take my sister." His voice cracked completely on the last word. "She's only 9. Keanu felt a knot form in his chest, the kind of pain that wasn't his, but one he could still feel, as if it were. He took a slow breath, fighting the heaviness. "Where's your mother?" "She hid me," Miguel said. "She told me to run north. She said there's a man near Nogales who helps kids, but when I got there, he was gone." Keanu's gaze softened even more. He could picture it, the fear, the desperation, the mother making the hardest choice a parent could make. "So you've been running ever since?" Miguel nodded. "I walked at night. Sometimes trucks stopped, and I hid. Sometimes people gave me food, but then they found me again." His hands shook harder. "They said they'd make me pay." Keanu placed a hand on the table beside him, grounding himself before speaking. "You did the right thing running. You're here now. That's what matters." The boy looked up at him, unsure whether to believe it. "You don't know them," he whispered. Keanu's voice was low, calm, certain. "Maybe not. But I know what fear does to people, and I know it doesn't have to win." The room was still, except for the soft hum of the air conditioner that barely worked. Miguel sat with his knees drawn up, holding the cup with both hands even though it was already empty. His eyes looked far away, somewhere beyond the walls, somewhere he wished he could return to but never would. Keanu watched him quietly. He had seen pain before on movie sets, in stories, in people who shared their burdens with him. But this was different. This wasn't a scene. This was a boy who had seen the worst of humanity before his voice had even finished changing. "Do you miss your home?" Keanu asked gently. Miguel nodded. "It was small, but my mother cooked every night. We didn't have much, but she sang while she made tortillas. My sister liked to dance when she heard music." A faint, fragile smile appeared, and then vanished. "When the gangs came, everything stopped. They took the men first, the strong ones. Then they came for us." Keanu leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening as he listened. He didn't interrupt. He wanted the boy to speak freely, to release what had been trapped inside him for too long. "They said if we helped them, we'd have food," Miguel said. "But my mother said no. She told me, if you carry what they give you, you become one of them." His voice trembled, repeating her words like a prayer. "They said she was stupid. That people like us should be thankful for whatever we get." Miguel's hands tightened around the cup until his knuckles turned white. "They broke my friend's arm. He was only 12. He said yes after that. I told them I never would." He looked up suddenly, tears brimming in his eyes, and they laughed. "They said they'd teach me to listen." Keanu felt his stomach tighten. He looked at the boy, at the bruises now visible beneath his torn shirt, and felt anger, not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that hardens resolve. "You were brave," he said softly. "Braver than most grown men." Miguel shook his head. "No, I was just scared. I ran. When they came to our house, my mother pushed me out the window. She told me to go before they took me too." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with everything unsaid. Keanu rubbed a hand over his face, trying to steady his breathing. He had seen grief before, but this kind of courage, wrapped in fear, it broke something inside him. After a long pause, he said, "Your mother sounds strong." Miguel nodded faintly. "She said God watches the ones who try to stay good, but I think she was wrong, because bad people still find us." Keanu met his eyes. "Maybe they do, but sometimes good people find us too." For a moment, the boy didn't answer. Then his small voice returned, cracked but steady. "Then why did you stop for me?" Keanu looked down, the corner of his mouth turning into a faint, sad smile. "Because someone once stopped for me when they didn't have to." Miguel blinked, uncertain if he'd heard right. Keanu's voice had softened, carrying something deeper, something that came from far behind his calm exterior. "You?" the boy asked quietly. "Someone helped you too?" Keanu nodded slowly. "A long time ago. I lost my father when I was young. I didn't know where to go or who to trust, but someone kind, told me I didn't have to become angry just because life was unfair." He looked at the boy and added gently, "That's what your mother wanted for you, too." Miguel's eyes lowered, tears silently tracing down his dusty cheeks. He reached for the small backpack beside him and pulled out a worn rosary. The beads were cracked, the cross slightly bent. "She gave me this," he whispered. "Said it would keep me safe. I think maybe it just helped me remember her voice." Keanu looked at the rosary, then back at the boy. She was right. Sometimes remembering love is the safest thing we have. The boy wiped his face quickly, embarrassed. "I don't want to cry anymore," he said. "It's okay to cry," Keanu said softly. "It means you're still human." For a long moment, neither spoke. The air felt heavy, but not hopeless. Keanu could see something changing in Miguel, a flicker of trust, fragile, but growing. Then, breaking the silence, Keanu reached for his phone. "I have a friend," he said. "Her name's Laura Miller. She helps people quietly, the kind of help that doesn't make noise but saves lives. She'll know what to do." He stepped outside into the cool desert air to make the call, keeping his voice low as he explained the situation. Laura listened carefully, then told him she'd start arranging a safe contact who could take the boy without alerting authorities. She reminded him that calling the police could expose Miguel to deportation or worse, lead the gang straight to him. When Keanu returned, Miguel looked up anxiously. "Are they coming for me?" Keanu shook his head. "No, someone's coming to help you. Someone I trust." Miguel stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You really think I can be good again?" Keanu smiled faintly. "You already are." The boy looked down at the rosary again and whispered, "Gracias." Keanu sat beside him, his tone firm but kind. "We'll find a way, I promise." The wind outside shifted, brushing against the curtains, and for the first time that night, Miguel didn't look afraid. The highway stretched like a silver ribbon through the darkness, empty and endless. Keanu's hands rested firmly on the steering wheel as the car hummed softly beneath him. Miguel was asleep in the passenger seat, his small head leaning against the window, the rosary still clutched loosely in his fingers. For the first time since Keanu had found him, the boy's breathing was steady. They had left the motel an hour ago. The air outside was cool and dry, carrying the faint scent of mesquite. The sky above was clear and endless, filled with stars that seemed to flicker with quiet sympathy. Keanu drove without speaking, letting the rhythm of the road keep his thoughts from drifting too deep. He didn't know where this path would lead, but he knew turning back wasn't an option. He glanced at Miguel again, noticing the faint traces of dried tears on his face. The boy looked peaceful, fragile in a way that reminded Keanu of how thin the line between danger and safety really was. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe they were past the worst of it. Then he saw it. A pair of headlights in the mirror, far back on the road but steady, too steady. He blinked, hoping it was just another traveler on the highway. But the car stayed behind, neither closing in nor fading away. Just watching. Keanu's instincts kicked in. He adjusted his speed slightly, testing the tail. The headlights matched him exactly. He didn't wake Miguel. Not yet. There was no point in frightening him. Until he was sure, he kept driving for another 10 minutes, watching the car in the mirror. It was a black SUV, its shape becoming clearer as the distance closed. At the next intersection, Keanu slowed near a small gas station, the only one for miles. He turned in casually, as if nothing were wrong. The SUV continued past, but didn't vanish completely. It stopped just up the road, parking where the headlights could still watch. Keanu stepped out of the car, stretching as though it were a routine fuel stop. He filled the tank slowly, eyes glancing through the reflection in the gas pump's metal surface. Two men sat inside the SUV. One wore a baseball cap, the other leaned forward with his elbow on the dashboard. Both had tattoos that wrapped around their necks, familiar markings that sent a chill through Keanu's chest. Los Cazadores. He replaced the fuel cap, thinking fast. Miguel still slept inside, oblivious to the danger. Keanu walked toward the small convenience store attached to the station, pretending to grab a drink. From the window, he saw the SUV's door open slightly. One of the men stepped out, pretending to check his phone, but keeping his eyes on the car. Keanu knew what was coming. He took a breath, steady but firm, then turned away from the window and walked back outside. The quiet of the desert pressed in on him. It was time to move again. Keanu climbed back into the driver's seat, closing the door quietly so the sound wouldn't wake Miguel. The boy stirred slightly, murmuring something in Spanish, then drifted back into sleep. Keanu started the engine and pulled away from the gas station slowly. His headlights dimmed. The SUV didn't move right away. It sat there for a long, tense minute, its parking lights glowing faintly in the mirror. Then the headlights flared back on, and it rolled onto the highway again, following. Keanu's grip on the wheel tightened. He took a deep breath, keeping his speed even, keeping the car's movements calm and natural. He didn't want to spook them into doing something reckless, not while Miguel was with him. He thought back to his years of filming action movies, remembering long nights on remote sets, stunt coordinators shouting directions, precision driving on winding roads. But this wasn't acting. There were no cameras, no retakes. There was only a boy whose life now depended on him. He scanned the road ahead, dark, winding, almost featureless. A sign flashed by. Cochise Canyon, 10 miles. He remembered that area from a charity event years ago. Dirt roads, old ranch trails, and narrow passes carved between red rocks. If he could reach the canyon, he could lose them. The SUV sped up behind him, closing the distance. Its headlights washed over the back window, flooding the inside of the car with white light. Miguel woke up with a start, blinking in confusion. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice small. Keanu kept his eyes on the road. "It's okay. Just stay down, all right? Everything's gonna be fine." Miguel ducked low in his seat, clutching the rosary. "It's them, isn't it?" Keanu didn't answer directly. "We just have to be smart." The road began to bend, climbing gradually toward the canyon. Keanu slowed slightly, making it seem like he was losing control. The SUV matched him again, staying close. He waited for the next sharp turn, the kind that forced drivers to trust their instincts instead of their nerves. The canyon road appeared a narrow, dusty trail leading into the darkness. Without hesitation, Keanu turned sharply off the main highway, kicking up a cloud of dirt behind him. The SUV followed seconds later, its tires skidding as it tried to keep up. The narrow path twisted between massive boulders and steep walls of rock. Dust swirled around the car in thick sheets, cutting visibility to almost nothing. Miguel gripped the door handle, his knuckles white. "Are we going to crash?" he shouted over the roar of the tires. Keanu's voice remained calm. "Not tonight." He took the next curve tight, barely avoiding a rock outcropping, then cut the headlights completely. The car disappeared into the darkness. Behind them, the SUV's lights jerked wildly, searching. The roar of its engine echoed off the canyon walls, louder, more frantic. Keanu eased off the gas, coasting silently down a narrow slope. He exhaled slowly, eyes locked on the faint glow fading behind him. For the first time in miles, the SUV couldn't see them. The SUV's headlights flickered in the distance, searching blindly across the canyon ridges. Keanu stopped the car behind a rock formation and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening. Only the faint hiss of the desert wind moved through the air. Miguel was breathing fast, his small hands gripping the seat. Did we lose them? Keanu looked through the windshield, scanning the trail they had come from. Dust still hung in the air, illuminated faintly by the SUV's beams. Not yet, he said quietly. But they don't know where we are. He reached over and touched Miguel's shoulder. You did good. Now stay quiet. They waited. Seconds dragged into minutes. The SUV crawled farther down the road, its lights bobbing like twin ghosts between the rocks. Then, finally, it turned sharply in the other direction and disappeared behind a ridge. Keanu let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned the key halfway, bringing the car to life without headlights. They rolled down a side path, one that wound through the canyon floor like a thin scar. The tires crunched softly over gravel. Miguel leaned his head against the window again, his exhaustion catching up to him. In a faint voice, he whispered, "They always find me." Keanu glanced at him, his tone calm and steady. Not this time. Miguel looked up, his eyes searching Keanu's face. "Why are you helping me?" Keanu thought for a moment before answering. Because sometimes the best way to fight is not to fight. The boy frowned slightly, trying to understand. What does that mean? It means fighting back isn't always about fists or guns, Keanu said. Sometimes it's about being smarter, staying kind when the world tells you not to. Miguel studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. My mother said the same thing. Keanu smiled faintly, eyes still on the winding path ahead. She sounds wise. The boy managed a small, tired smile of his own. She was. The canyon opened up ahead, revealing the faint glow of Tucson far on the horizon. Keanu steered toward it, the danger now behind them, at least for the night. As they drove out of the canyon, the desert wind swept over the car, carrying away the last of the dust and fear. Miguel's eyes closed once more, the rosary still in his hands. Keanu glanced at him and whispered softly, "You're safe now." And for the first time, he almost believed it. The night stretched thin by the time Keanu's car turned onto a narrow dirt road leading toward the foothills. A single lantern glowed faintly in the distance, marking the edge of Hank Garrison's ranch. The old man had retired from the Border Patrol years ago, but his loyalty and discretion had never wavered. Keanu trusted him. He'd met Hank while volunteering for a charity that helped migrant families reunite, and he knew the man's word carried the kind of weight that came from living through things he'd never talk about. When Keanu pulled up beside the weathered barn, Hank was already waiting on the porch, leaning on his cane, his broad frame still imposing, even in the dim light. His silver hair caught the lantern's glow as he called out, "You picked a hell of a night to show up, Reeves." Keanu stepped out quietly. "Sorry to drop in unannounced, Hank. I need your help." Hank's eyes shifted to the car. "The kid?" Keanu nodded. "Name's Miguel. He's in trouble. Bad trouble." Hank's voice lowered, the tone serious. "Gangs?" "Yes. Los Cazadores. They've been following us since Nogales." The older man sighed deeply, rubbing his temple. "I've heard of them. They don't scare easy." Keanu opened the passenger door. Miguel stepped out slowly, still clutching his small backpack, his eyes darting around the property. The smell of hay and the sound of crickets filled the silence. Hank looked at the boy for a moment, then motioned toward the porch. "Come on, you both look like you've been through a storm." Inside the modest ranch house, the warmth of a fireplace chased away the chill of the desert night. Hank poured coffee for Keanu and hot milk for Miguel, setting the mugs down without asking questions. The boy sat near the fire, his eyes drawn to an old framed photo of Hank in uniform standing beside a dog. "Who's that?" Miguel asked softly. Hank smiled faintly. "That Shadow. Best partner I ever had." A scratching sound came from the hallway, and then a gray-muzzled dog trotted into the room, tail wagging. Miguel's face lit up instantly. "Shadow?" "Same one," Hank said. "He's old now, but his heart's still young." The boy reached out hesitantly, and the dog sniffed his hand, before resting its head on Miguel's knee. It was the first time Keanu had seen the boy smile since they met. Hank glanced at Keanu over his cup. He's been running long enough. Let's give him one night to rest. Keanu nodded. Thank you. The older man looked toward the door, his expression grim. But come morning, we'll need a plan. You can't outrun these people forever. The ranch had gone quiet. The wind rustled through the mesquite trees, and the sound of Shadow's paws tapping across the floor echoed softly in the night. Miguel sat cross-legged by the fire, gently stroking the dog's fur. The boy's eyes were heavy, but the calm that had settled over him was new, fragile, yet real. Keanu stood by the window, watching the horizon. Far beyond the hills, the faint lights of Tucson flickered like distant stars. For the first time in hours, he let himself breathe. He didn't know how long they could stay, but he knew one thing for certain: they couldn't stay long. The crunch of tires on gravel broke the stillness. Hank reached instinctively for the rifle propped beside the door, but Keanu raised a hand. "It's okay," he said. "That's Laura." Moments later, a white SUV rolled up near the porch. Laura Miller stepped out, her hair tied back, eyes alert and serious even in the dim glow of the porch light. She had always been the one Keanu called when things got complicated. She wasn't just his assistant, she was the mind that made impossible problems solvable. "Where is he?" she asked as she stepped inside. Keanu nodded toward the fireplace. Miguel looked up, startled by her sudden arrival. Laura softened immediately, kneeling to his level. "Hi, sweetheart. My name's Laura. You're safe here, okay?" Miguel nodded shyly. Shadow leaned against him, sensing his unease. Laura turned to Keanu and Hank. "I spoke with someone, Maria Torres. She runs a private advocacy network for minors crossing the border. She's not official, but she's the one the real rescuers call when bureaucracy gets in the way." Hank raised an eyebrow. "Unofficial sounds risky." Laura's expression didn't waver. "So is everything about this." Keanu leaned forward. "Can we trust her? With my life?" Laura said. "She's helped kids in worse situations. She'll know what to do." Hank poured her a cup of coffee and motioned to the map pinned on the wall. "If you're thinking of getting him across to a shelter, you'll need to avoid Route 19. Too many eyes. Try the back roads through Arivaca instead." Laura nodded, taking notes on her phone. "Understood. I'll need a few hours to arrange a transfer." Keanu rubbed the back of his neck, the weight of the decision pressing harder than before. "We're running out of hours. I don't want Miguel near any official channels yet. If his name shows up on a list, Los Cazadores will know before breakfast." Hank grunted in agreement. "That gang's got more reach than folks realize. Even law enforcement leaks." He looked at Keanu seriously. "You're walking a fine line, son. Help the kid, and you might start a storm you can't control." Keanu met his gaze evenly. "Then, we'll face it when it comes." Laura exchanged a look with Hank. "You really think you can stay ahead of them?" Keanu nodded once. "For him, I'll try." The fire had burned low by the time the plan came together. Miguel had fallen asleep on the couch with Shadow curled at his feet, the two breathing in sync as if they'd known each other for years. Laura worked quietly at the kitchen table, phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and composed. Every so often she glanced toward the window, checking the empty road. Hank leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You know, if anyone finds out I'm helping you hide a kid from a gang, I'll be on every watch list from here to Mexico." Keanu looked up from where he sat near the door. "You didn't have to say yes." Hank gave a small, tired smile. "Didn't have to. Wanted to. The law doesn't always know what's right anymore." Laura hung up the phone and exhaled. "Maria's in. She can take him to a protected youth center in Phoenix by tomorrow night. We just have to get him to her contact near Marana by sunrise." Keanu nodded, his relief mixed with unease. "Sunrise is a long way off." Hank poured himself another cup of coffee, his weathered hands steady. "You'll want to leave before first light. Less risk of anyone spotting you. I'll cover the tracks after you're gone." Outside, the wind howled softly against the tin roof. The night was growing colder. Keanu moved closer to the window again, his reflection dark against the glass. For a brief second, he saw himself the way others might, an actor far from the cameras, standing in a battle that no one would ever see or celebrate. He turned back toward Hank and Laura. If this leaks, it could get ugly. Not just for me, for him. They'll make him a target. Hank's voice turned grave. Then you do what your gut tells you. The rest will follow. Keanu looked at Miguel, asleep and peaceful for once. The boy's small fingers still held onto the rosary. He deserves a chance to grow up without fear, Keanu said quietly. Laura packed her papers and glanced at him. Then that's what we'll give him. Hank opened the door, the cold air sweeping in. Be careful out there, son. Gangs like these don't stop when the sun comes up. Keanu nodded, his decision made. Neither do I. As dawn began to edge faintly across the sky, the ranch fell silent, again except for the steady breath of a boy who finally had hope. The first light of morning crept across Hank's ranch, painting the desert in muted gold. Dust hung in the air from a car approaching down the long dirt road. Laura stood by the porch, watching as the vehicle came closer, its tires kicking up a cloud. Keanu stepped out beside her, his eyes tired but alert. The car pulled up and stopped. Out stepped a woman in her mid-40s, her hair tied back, her clothes simple but purposeful. She carried a thick folder under her arm and a face that spoke of sleepless nights and hard decisions. Maria Torres, she introduced herself, extending a hand to Keanu. Thank you for trusting me. Keanu shook her hand firmly. Thank you for coming. Her gaze softened as she looked past him into the house, where Miguel sat at the table with Hank's dog Shadow lying across his feet. That's him? She asked quietly. Yes, 13 years old, from Nogales. His mother told him to run before Los Cazadores took him. Maria nodded slowly, her eyes heavy with understanding. I've heard too many stories like that lately. They recruit younger every year. Children make easy couriers, they don't raise suspicion. Keanu's jaw tightened. And the ones who refuse? Her answer came quietly. They disappear. The weight of that single word filled the space between them. Keanu motioned for her to come inside. Maria sat at the table across from Miguel. The boy stared down at his hands, unsure whether to speak. She smiled gently. Hola, Miguel. Soy Maria. Estoy aquí para ayudarte. He looked up, recognizing the kindness in her tone. ¿De verdad? Sí. Pero necesito tu paciencia, she said softly. We can protect you, but the process isn't fast. Keanu leaned forward. How long? Maria opened her folder, flipping through papers. For a minor crossing alone, it could take weeks, maybe months. Asylum petitions take time, and the system's overwhelmed. Laura's brow furrowed. We don't have that long. They've already tracked him this far. Maria nodded grimly. I know. But if we do this outside the system, we risk exposure. And if the wrong people find out, he could end up deported before we can even file the paperwork. Miguel's small voice broke the silence. Deported? Keanu turned toward him immediately, but the boy had already pushed his chair back, fear rising in his eyes. No, he whispered, shaking his head. I can't go back. They'll kill me. Miguel, wait, Keanu said, rising from his seat. But the boy didn't wait. He grabbed his backpack and bolted through the door, out into the desert light. Keanu was after him in seconds. The sun had risen high enough to burn through the morning haze, casting long shadows over the sand. Keanu sprinted across the open field behind the ranch, his boots crunching against the dry earth. Ahead, Miguel ran fast, his small figure weaving between cactus and brush, his backpack bouncing wildly against his shoulders. Miguel! Keanu shouted, his voice carrying across the desert. Wait! But the boy didn't stop. Fear had taken control, the kind that drowns out everything else. He stumbled over a rock, caught himself, and kept running. The ground sloped downward toward an old, dry riverbed where the land turned pale and cracked. Keanu pushed harder, the heat pressing down on him like a weight. When he finally reached the edge of the riverbed, he saw Miguel crouched near the center, breathing hard, clutching his knees. The boy's body shook with sobs he was trying to hide. Keanu slowed, catching his breath, his boots crunching softly against the sand. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to startle him. "Miguel," he said gently, "you're not in danger here." The boy didn't look up. "They'll send me back," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Everyone says they help, but they always send us back." Keanu stepped closer, his tone low and calm. "No one's sending you anywhere. I gave you my word." Miguel shook his head. "You don't understand. They have people everywhere, even the police. If they find me, they'll make me disappear like the others." Keanu knelt down beside him, resting one hand on the warm earth to steady himself. The desert wind blew gently, carrying a faint scent of dust and sage. He waited until Miguel's breathing slowed just a little before he spoke again. "Running doesn't mean you're weak," Keanu said softly. "It means you're still fighting." The boy looked up, his face streaked with tears, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Fighting?" Keanu nodded. "You ran because you wanted to live. That's what courage looks like." Miguel blinked, his lower lip trembling. He opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't. Instead, he reached out, grabbing the fabric of Keanu's shirt, as if afraid he'd disappear too. Keanu led him. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, steady and firm. The silence between them was filled only by the sound of the wind. After a moment, Miguel whispered, "I don't want to run anymore." "Then you won't," Keanu said. "But we'll move smart, together." Miguel's grip loosened, and he nodded slowly, finally letting out a long, shuddering breath. The panic in his eyes began to fade, replaced by something new: trust. Keanu rose to his feet and offered his hand. "Come on, let's go home." Miguel hesitated only for a second before taking it. Keanu led Miguel back across the dry riverbed, their footsteps crunching softly over the cracked soil. The sun was unforgiving now, the kind of desert heat that pressed against the skin like fire. Miguel's small hand clung tightly to Keanu's, the fear in his steps slowly giving way to exhaustion. By the time they reached the edge of the ranch, Maria and Laura were waiting. Hank stood on the porch, shielding, his eyes from the glare. Keanu guided Miguel toward them, his voice steady. "He's okay," he said, "just scared." Maria crouched down to meet Miguel's eye level. "You don't have to run anymore, mijo," she said softly. "We'll make sure you're safe." Miguel looked up at her warily. "No papers, no family." Maria smiled faintly. "Then we'll start with what you do have: courage, and people who care." Keanu placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "We'll find a way, remember?" The boy nodded slowly, wiping the sweat and dust from his face. Shadow trotted up from the porch and pressed against Miguel's leg, sensing the tension. The boy knelt, hugging the old dog tightly. "He waited for me," Miguel whispered. Hank watched quietly, his expression thoughtful. "You've got yourself a brave one there, Keanu. But you can't keep hiding him. Not forever." "I know," Keanu replied quietly. "That's why I'm not sending him off alone." Laura frowned. "What do you mean?" Keanu met her eyes. "I'll take him to Phoenix myself. We'll drive tonight, no stops. I want to make sure he reaches Maria's contact safely." Maria hesitated, understanding the risk. "That's not the safest choice for you." Keanu shook his head. "Maybe not, but it's the right one." The room fell silent for a moment. Then Hank gave a small nod. "If anyone can get him there, it's you." Miguel looked up, uncertain. "You'd really come with me?" Keanu smiled softly. "I told you we're in this together." Maria closed her folder, finally agreeing. "All right, I'll make the call and prepare the route. But once you cross that line, there's no going back." Keanu looked toward the horizon where the heat shimmered against the endless desert. Sometimes the only way forward is across it. As the sun dipped lower, the air cooled slightly, carrying the smell of dry sage and distant rain. Miguel stood beside him, holding the rosary again. Keanu looked down at the boy and whispered, "Let's go finish what we started." The road stretched out in silence, lit only by the faint glow of the moon and the distant hum of truck stops. Keanu kept both hands on the steering wheel, his eyes alert. Miguel sat in the passenger seat beside him, half asleep, his small frame slumped against the door. The boy had barely spoken since they left Hank's ranch. The tension of the escape hung heavy between them, carried along with the sound of tires rolling over cracked asphalt. They avoided main highways, taking back roads through the desert plains. The night was thick with dust, and the smell of gasoline lingered faintly through the open window. Keanu glanced at the dashboard clock. It was just past midnight. If all went well, they would reach Yuma before dawn, meet Maria's contact, and continue toward Phoenix. But something in his gut told him it wouldn't be that simple. When they reached the edge of town, the lights of a small roadside diner flickered in the distance. The sign read, "Dottie's Grill." Half the bulbs burned out. Keanu pulled into the gravel lot. The car's engine clicked softly as it cooled. Miguel blinked awake, rubbing his eyes. "Where are we?" he asked groggily. "Just stopping for coffee," Keanu said. "You hungry?" Miguel nodded faintly. "A little." They stepped inside the diner. The place was nearly empty. Just a waitress cleaning tables and two truckers talking quietly at the counter. A jukebox hummed faintly in the corner. Keanu led Miguel to a booth near the back, where they could see the door. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, smiled politely. "Coffee?" "Black, please," Keanu said, "and a grilled cheese for him." She nodded, writing the order down, but her eyes lingered on Keanu's face a second longer than usual. Recognition flickered there, followed by surprise. He gave her a small, polite smile, the kind that said, "Please don't make a scene." She didn't. As the woman walked away, Keanu's gaze shifted to the corner of the diner. A man sat alone by the window, pretending to read a newspaper. His posture was too stiff, his glances too frequent. Every few seconds, he checked the parking lot outside. Keanu's instincts sharpened. He'd seen that kind of watchfulness before on film sets, in back alleys, in places where danger didn't announce itself until it was too late. He leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "Miguel, listen to me. When I tell you to go to the bathroom, you go. Stay there until I come get you." Miguel's eyes widened, but he didn't argue. He'd learned to trust that tone in Keanu's voice. The waitress returned with their food. As she set it down, the man by the window folded his newspaper, stood, and stepped outside. Keanu's heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but focus. "Time to go," he whispered. Miguel froze mid-bite. "Now?" Keanu nodded. "Now." They slipped out the back door quietly, the cool desert air rushing over them. The alley behind the diner was narrow and dim, littered with trash bins and old tires. Keanu guided Miguel along the side of the building toward the parking lot, keeping his movements quiet and deliberate. The night smelled faintly of oil and rain-soaked sand. He scanned the lot. The black sedan that had been parked by the diner's entrance was gone. His stomach tightened. "Get in the car," he said softly. Miguel obeyed, sliding into the passenger seat. Keanu started the engine and pulled out slowly, headlights off until they reached the road. The street ahead was empty, the town still sleeping. For a moment, he thought maybe he'd overreacted until two motorcycles appeared in the mirror. Their engines broke the silence like thunder. Keanu kept his voice calm. "Stay low, Miguel." The boy ducked down instantly, clutching his backpack to his chest. Keanu adjusted his speed, testing the pattern of pursuit. The motorcycles followed closely, weaving between lanes, their lights flashing in the darkness. He turned sharply at the next intersection, tires skidding slightly. The bikes followed. Another turn, another. No change. Whoever they were, they knew exactly who they were tailing. Up ahead, the glow of the highway faded into open desert. The road narrowed, bordered by tall reeds that swayed in the wind. Keanu gritted his teeth and pushed the car faster. The bikes kept pace easily. Then, without warning, bright headlights appeared ahead. A truck pulled across both lanes, blocking the road completely. Keanu slammed on the brakes, the car skidding sideways until it came to a stop. Dust filled the air, thick and choking. "Out!" Keanu said quickly. They stepped out of the car just as the motorcycles boxed them in from behind. 2 riders dismounted, their faces hidden behind helmets. From the truck, 3 more men emerged, tattoos curling up their necks, weapons visible but lowered. One of them stepped forward, his boots crunching over the gravel. His presence alone made the others pause. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket marked with the symbol of a wolf. His voice was calm but cold. "Keanu Reeves," he said, his accent thick. "Didn't think we'd meet like this." Keanu studied him, unflinching. "You must be Rafael Cruz," the man smirked. "You know my name. That saves me an introduction." His eyes moved to Miguel. "We've been looking for the boy. He belongs to us." Keanu stepped slightly in front of Miguel. "He doesn't belong to anyone." Rafael tilted his head, amused. "Even Hollywood can't save this boy. You think your fame makes you untouchable?" Keanu's voice was steady. "No, but it makes you visible. If anything happens to him, the world will know your face." The words hung in the air like a quiet thunderclap. Even the gang members hesitated. They knew the name. The cameras. The eyes that followed everything Keanu did. Rafael's smirk faded. "You think you can scare me with headlines?" Keanu didn't blink. No, just the truth. The air was thick with tension. The desert wind howled through the open stretch of road, carrying a faint whistle that cut through the silence. Rafael stared at Keanu for a long moment, searching his face for weakness. Instead, he found calm, a kind of stillness that unnerved him more than defiance ever could. One of the men beside him shifted impatiently. "Boss, what do we do?" Rafael didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward Miguel, who stood frozen behind Keanu. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "That boy saw things he shouldn't have. He's not your problem." Keanu's tone remained level, almost gentle. "Maybe not, but he's a person, not your property." Rafael's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're getting into." Keanu took a single step forward. The gang members raised their weapons instinctively, but Rafael lifted a hand, signaling them to wait. "If you hurt him," Keanu said, his voice dropping low, "you'll lose more than a business. You'll lose the chance to disappear. Cameras, news, law enforcement, you know how fast it spreads. One story, one picture, and everything you've built burns." Rafael's expression hardened, but behind his cold eyes, a flicker of calculation appeared. He knew Keanu wasn't bluffing. The man's face alone could turn the world's attention on this small desert road. Attention was poison to men like Rafael. For a moment, neither moved. The night seemed to hold its breath. Then, a faint noise came from behind the truck, a fence creaking. Rafael turned sharply. "What was that?" Before anyone could react, Miguel was gone. The boy had slipped through a gap in the wire fence and was sprinting into the open field. "Get him!" one of the men shouted. Rafael spun back toward Keanu, fury blazing in his eyes. But Keanu stepped forward, blocking their line of sight. "He's just a kid," he said. "You'll have to go through me first." That moment of hesitation was all Miguel needed. His small figure vanished into the shadows. Rafael cursed, motioning to his men. "Find him, now!" 2 bikers tore off after the boy, engines screaming. Dust exploded behind them. Keanu moved in the opposite direction, drawing the rest of the gang's attention. He didn't run fast, but he made sure they saw him. The headlights from their vehicles swung toward his path, chasing his silhouette into the darkness. He knew exactly what he was doing, leading them away from the boy. The desert stretched endlessly under the white blaze of the moon. The car tore through the sand, its headlights off, the only sound the grinding of gravel beneath its tires. Keanu kept his focus straight ahead, every sense tuned to the rhythm of pursuit. In the mirror, dust clouds twisted behind him, 3 motorcycles and a pickup truck. The gang closing in again. He pressed harder on the gas, steering off the dirt road into the open plain. The engine strained as the terrain grew rougher. The world around him shimmered in silver light, sharp and unforgiving. He knew he couldn't outrun them forever. Somewhere behind those riders, Miguel was still out there, running towards safety. That was all that mattered. Ahead, the dark outline of an old windmill rose against the horizon, its blades creaking faintly in the wind. Keanu slowed, his mind already working. The land here was open, no cover, no trees, just rocks, sand, and the ghostly structure standing tall against the moon. Perfect for a distraction. He brought the car to a stop beside a broken fence. The engine ticked softly as he stepped out, the night air cutting cold against his sweat-soaked skin. He pulled off his jacket and hat, placing them carefully on a fence post. From a distance, they would look like a man standing still, waiting. The sound of engines grew louder again. The gang was coming fast. He crouched low and moved quickly toward a cluster of rocks that jutted from the earth about 100 yards away. The dust rolled past him like fog as the headlights swept over the horizon. The truck pulled up near the windmill, the bikers circling it like predators closing in on prey. One of them shouted, "There he is!" The others followed, weapons drawn, approaching the decoy. From behind the rocks, Keanu watched. He could see Raphael step forward, his posture confident, ready to claim his victory. Then, the realization hit them. The figure wasn't moving. A gust of wind caught the jacket, and the hat toppled off the post. Raphael's voice rose in anger. "It's a trick! Spread out!" But Keanu was already moving. He darted along the edge of the terrain toward an old communications tower that loomed over the landscape, its rusted frame half collapsed. The closer he got, the more he could feel the faint flicker of his phone's signal returning. He reached the base of the tower and crouched behind the concrete foundation, pulling out his phone. The screen lit up weakly, one bar of service, barely enough. He typed quickly, his fingers trembling from adrenaline. Coordinates: near windmill, off Route 87. Miguel heading northeast. Get him to safety. Don't worry about me. He pressed send and waited, watching the small icon spin before the message finally delivered. Relief washed through him, sharp and brief. Before he tucked the phone away, the roar of engines filled the air again. They'd realized the trap. Headlights cut through the darkness, sweeping toward his direction. He pressed his back against the cold concrete, breathing slowly, forcing himself to stay still. He could hear their voices now close, angry, confused. "He's here somewhere. Find him." Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. He wasn't armed. He didn't need to be. His only goal now was to buy Miguel enough time to disappear completely. The roar of the engines grew louder as the gang fanned out. Across the desert floor, their flashlights cut sharp streaks through the dust, sweeping over rocks and dry grass. Keanu stayed crouched behind the base of the communications tower, his breath slow and controlled. The metal beams groaned softly above him, an eerie echo in the emptiness. He could see Raphael's silhouette among the moving lights. The gang leader barked orders in Spanish, his voice raw with fury. "Spread out! He's here!" The men obeyed, their boots crunching against the gravel. Every sound seemed to carry for miles. Keanu pressed himself lower, feeling the grit against his palms. His pulse thudded in his ears. He thought of Miguel, of the boy's trembling voice, his mother's rosary clutched tight in his small hands. That was the image that steadied him. That was why he couldn't give in to panic. A beam of light swept dangerously close. One of the men climbed onto a nearby rock, scanning the area. Keanu ducked behind the tower's base, heart hammering. The light lingered for a few seconds, then drifted away. The sound of engines revving echoed again in the distance, signaling that half the group had split off to search farther north. Raphael stayed behind with two others, walking slowly toward the tower. "He's not going far," Raphael muttered. "He's too famous to vanish. The world knows his face." Keanu heard the crunch of boots coming closer. He knew hiding wouldn't last much longer. He moved quietly, slipping around the back of the structure toward a cluster of jagged rocks. The moonlight revealed a faint path leading upward, a slope that curved behind the ridge. If he could reach it, he might gain enough elevation to see their movements. He took one careful step after another, keeping low, every sound deliberate. But the crunch of loose gravel betrayed him. One of the men shouted, "There!" A gunshot cracked through the night. The bullet struck the rocks near Keanu's feet, sending shards of stone flying. He dove for cover, pressing flat against the ground. His breathing quickened, but his focus sharpened. The shooter advanced, weapon drawn. "Come out, Reeves," Raphael called, his voice carrying across the desert. "You think this is some kind of movie? You can't outsmart the real thing." Keanu rose slowly from behind the rocks, his hands open, calm. "I'm not trying to outsmart you," he said, his voice steady even in the wind. "I'm trying to end this before anyone else gets hurt." Raphael gave a cold laugh. "You're outnumbered." "Maybe," Keanu replied quietly, but not unseen. Raphael frowned, glancing around in confusion. At that moment, in the far distance, the faint wail of sirens pierced the air. They were distant but unmistakable, echoing through the canyons like a warning. Maria's message had reached someone. Help was coming. Raphael's head snapped toward the sound. "Cops!" one of the men hissed. The gang leader cursed, slamming his fist against the hood of the truck. "Get the bikes! Move!" Engines roared to life again. The gang scattered, their headlights streaking across the sand as they fled into the dark, leaving clouds of dust swirling in their wake. Keanu stayed still until the last engine sound faded. Only the hum of the windmill and the distant sirens remained. His legs gave way, and he dropped to one knee, exhaustion washing over him. The desert was silent once more, vast and endless. He looked up at the moon, pale and cold above him, and whispered softly, "He's safe now." Then, finally, Keanu Reeves allowed himself to rest. When Keanu opened his eyes, the world was white and still. For a few seconds, he didn't know where he was. The faint hum of machines, the sterile scent of antiseptic, and the soft rhythm of footsteps on tile slowly came into focus. Sunlight filtered through a set of half-drawn curtains. He tried to sit up, but pain shot through his side. A nurse hurried over, her expression kind but firm. "Easy," she said. "You're safe. You're in Tucson." Tucson. The word settled slowly in his mind, like dust after a storm. His last memory was of the windmill, the headlights fading into the night. Then, everything went dark. "How long have I been here?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Since early morning," she replied. "You were found unconscious by a patrol unit. They said you collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration. You're lucky they got there when they did." Keanu nodded faintly, his gaze moving toward the door as if expecting someone to appear. "The boy," he murmured. "Miguel, where is he?" Before the nurse could answer, the door opened and Laura stepped inside, her face weary but relieved. "He's safe," she said quickly, before he could ask again. "Maria got to him before dawn. He's under protection now." Relief swept through him like a tide. "Where?" "At a child welfare center near the mission hospital," Laura explained. "He's with other kids. They're keeping everything quiet, no press, no reports. The authorities know about Los Cazadores, but they're handling it off the books. No one's naming you, Keanu. They understand what you did." He exhaled slowly, his eyes closing for a moment. "Good," he whispered. "That's all I wanted." Maria entered a few minutes later, her clothes still dusty from travel, her tone composed. "You made it out alive," she said, half smiling. "That was reckless." "Maybe," he said, his voice soft but sure. "But necessary." She nodded, setting her folder down. "Miguel's safe. He asked about you first thing this morning." That single sentence pulled something deep inside him. "Can I see him?" The nurse hesitated, but Maria nodded. "A few minutes, if you can walk." Keanu swung his legs over the edge of the bed, wincing as the muscles protested. Laura moved to steady him, but he shook his head. "I've got it." He stood slowly, the world tilting slightly before finding balance again. Every step toward the hallway felt heavier than the last, but the thought of seeing the boy kept him moving. The nurse led them down a quiet corridor toward a small recreation room near the center's east wing. Through the doorway, Keanu saw Miguel sitting at a small table with a box of crayons scattered around him. A half-finished drawing lay in front of him, bright colors filling the shape of a house under a yellow Sunday shadow. The dog was drawn beside it, smiling. When the boy looked up and saw him, the crayons fell from his hands. "Keanu!" He ran across the room before anyone could stop him and threw his arms around Keanu's waist. The hug was sudden, tight, and full of everything words couldn't say. Keanu rested one hand gently on the boy's back. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" Miguel nodded, his voice muffled against Keanu's shirt. "You didn't give up on me." Keanu smiled, his eyes warm. "Because you didn't give up on yourself." Miguel stepped back, wiping his face quickly, embarrassed by his tears. "They told me you were hurt," he said. "I thought maybe—" "I'm fine," Keanu said gently. "Just a little rest and I'll be good as new." Maria smiled from the doorway. "He's been asking for you all morning. Wouldn't eat until we told him you'd wake up soon." Miguel grinned shyly. "I just wanted to make sure you were still here." Keanu lowered himself onto the bench beside the drawing table. His body still ached, but the boy's energy made the pain fade into dawn. The background. "So," he said, looking at the colorful paper in front of them. "Is this your house?" Miguel nodded. "It's what I remember. It was small, but my mom had flowers outside. I want to plant them again one day." Keanu studied the picture carefully. The house was bright blue, the windows open, sunlight pouring through them. The small stick figures out front were smiling. One of them, drawn taller than the rest, wore a black jacket. Keanu chuckled softly. "And that's me, huh?" Miguel's grin widened. "You helped me build the fence." "Looks like a good fence," Keanu said. "Strong." The boy beamed. It was the first time Keanu had seen him look like a child, again, unguarded, hopeful. Maria leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "He's been helping the other kids, translating, sharing food, even reading bedtime stories when some of them can't sleep. The staff says he's a natural caretaker." Keanu smiled at that. "He's got the heart for it." Miguel looked up. "They're teaching me English too. I can say a lot now." He paused proudly before adding, "I am not afraid anymore." The words hit Keanu harder than he expected. He swallowed, his voice rough, when he answered, "That's the best thing I've heard all week." Laura entered quietly, setting a small envelope on the table. "The center's budget is stretched thin," she said to Maria. "I think this might help." Maria opened it, eyes widening slightly at the check inside. "This is too much." Keanu shook his head. "It's not enough. Use it to keep the place running. Expand the program if you can. No names, no press." Maria nodded slowly. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," Keanu said. "This isn't about me." Miguel tilted his head. "You're helping other kids?" Keanu nodded. "Kids like you deserve a chance." Miguel smiled quietly, then looked down at his drawing again. "Can I keep this one?" he asked. Keanu nodded. "Of course." The boy carefully folded the picture, holding it close to his chest. "Then you have to promise to come back and see the next one." Keanu chuckled. "I'll hold you to that." Outside the window, the sky had turned bright with morning. Birds circled the mission courtyard, their shadows gliding across the white walls. The sound of laughter drifted in from the playground beyond, children chasing one another through the sunlight. Keanu stood, feeling the warmth of that sound fill the quiet room. Miguel followed him to the door, still clutching the folded drawing. "Are you leaving?" the boy asked softly. "Not for long," Keanu said. "You've got a new beginning here, and I'll always know where to find you." He knelt one last time to meet the boy's gaze. "You keep building that fence, all right? Make it strong." Miguel nodded. "And with flowers?" Keanu smiled. "Especially with flowers." As he turned to leave, Maria met his eyes with gratitude. "You changed his life," she said. Keanu shook his head. "He changed mine." The door closed behind him, leaving Miguel's laughter echoing softly in the hallway. It started with whispers. A few local reporters in Arizona began asking questions about a late-night desert pursuit. An anonymous 911 call and a rescue that no one could fully explain. A child found near the border. A famous actor seen at a Tucson mission hospital the next morning. The pieces didn't fit neatly together, but the story was spreading fast. Keanu watched the reports quietly from his living room days later, the TV volume low. Every channel seemed to mention the same words: mystery, hero, actor involved in rescue. He turned it off before the headlines finished. He didn't need recognition. He just wanted Miguel safe. Laura arrived that afternoon, holding a folder. "They're getting too close," she said. "Someone leaked your name to the press, though they don't have proof." "You want me to issue a statement?" Keanu shook his head. "No. The more we talk, the more attention it brings." Laura hesitated. "People are asking questions about why you were there, about the gang violence in that area." "I was helping a friend," Keanu said simply. "That's all anyone needs to know." She studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You're impossible." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. "You say that like it's new." Meanwhile, south of the border, Los Cazadores were unraveling. Their failed pursuit had drawn the attention of law enforcement agencies that had been watching them for months. A web of trafficking routes, forged passports, and intimidation schemes stretched across the region, and now the cracks were widening. Maria kept Keanu informed, quietly. One evening, she called him from her office, her voice low. "You'll want to hear this," she said. The DEA just confirmed Rafael Cruz was taken into custody near Nogales. His own men gave him up after a raid. They found evidence tying him to several disappearances. Keanu listened in silence, staring out the window at the fading sunset. "He's alive? For now," Maria said. "But the others, many are scattering. The organization is falling apart." Keanu nodded slowly. "Violence always eats itself." There was a pause on the line. "You really believe that?" she asked. "I have to," he said. "Otherwise, none of this means anything." When the call ended, Keanu sat quietly for a long time. The air in the room felt heavy, but still. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one, ordinary life resuming beyond the edge of everything that had happened. 2 days later, Maria called again, this time with brighter news. "Miguel's case is moving faster than expected. The community's been incredible. Donations, offers of support, people asking how they can help." "That's good," Keanu said, his tone gentle. "He deserves a stable home." Maria hesitated before adding, "There's a couple from Texas, Robert and Elaine Parker. They lost their son 2 years ago. They've been working with the center for months and were touched by Miguel's story. They'd like to adopt him." Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. "Are they ready for what comes with that?" "That's what I want you to find out," Maria said. "They've asked to meet you before the transition goes through." He opened his eyes again, resolve settling in. "Tell them I'll be there." The meeting took place on a quiet Sunday afternoon in the Mission Center's garden. The sun was warm but gentle, and the sound of children laughing drifted from the nearby courtyard. Keanu arrived early, walking along the small path lined with wildflowers Miguel had helped plant. It was peaceful here, the kind of place where healing began slowly but surely. A few minutes later, Maria led the couple toward him. Robert Parker was in his early 40s, tall with kind eyes that carried a sadness he didn't hide. His wife Elaine walked beside him, holding a folder against her chest. Her smile was soft but fragile, as if she hadn't practiced it in a long time. "Mr. Reeves," Robert said, extending his hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet us." Keanu shook his hand warmly. "Please, call me Keanu." Maria motioned for them to sit on the benches under the shade. The couple glanced around the garden, watching a few children play soccer nearby. Elaine's eyes lingered on them longer than her husband's. She finally said, "He reminds us of our son. He would have been close to Miguel's age." Keanu nodded quietly. "I read a little about you both. I'm sorry for your loss." Elaine took a slow breath. "Thank you. It's been hard. But we've been volunteering here for almost a year now. When we heard about Miguel's story, it felt different. Like maybe we could start again, not to replace what we lost, but to help someone who still has a chance. Keanu studied them carefully. He's been through more than most adults I know. The trauma, the fear, the guilt of surviving those things don't go away overnight. You'll need patience. Robert nodded. We understand. We've been through therapy ourselves. We're not trying to erase what happened to him, only to give him a place where he can stop running. Keanu leaned back slightly, watching the sunlight flicker through the branches above them. He trusts slowly, he said. But once he does, it's for life. Don't break that. Elaine's voice softened. We won't. For a moment, none of them spoke. The sound of the soccer ball hitting the fence filled the silence. Then Maria stood, giving them space. I'll check on the paperwork, she said, walking toward the main building. When she was gone, Robert cleared his throat. We wanted to ask you something, he said. Why did you risk so much for him? You could have called someone else. You could have walked away. Keanu looked at the children playing in the distance, their laughter carried on the wind. Because I've seen what happens when people don't step in, he said quietly. Too many look away when they could have helped. Miguel reminded me of a kid I once was. Lost, scared, waiting for someone to care. Elaine's eyes filled with tears. You changed his life. Keanu smiled faintly. He changed mine too. Just then, Miguel appeared from behind the bushes, running toward them with a sketchbook in hand. When he saw the couple, he slowed, shy but curious. Maria must have told him about the visitors. Keanu crouched down to meet his eyes. These are the Parkers, he said. They came to see you. Miguel looked up at them, then at Keanu. Are they good people? Keanu nodded gently. Yes, I think they are. Miguel studied them for another moment, then held out his sketchbook. I drew a new house, he said. Elaine knelt down beside him. Can I see it? He opened the page. It was a bright picture, a house with flowers, a fence, and 3 people standing outside. In the corner, under the blue sky, was a 4th figure watching from afar. Elaine's voice trembled as she said, It's beautiful. Keanu smiled, a quiet peace settling in his chest. It's perfect. The morning air was cool and still when Keanu arrived at the mission chapel. The soft chime of the bells echoed across the courtyard, their sound blending with the rustle of palm leaves swaying gently in the breeze. The sun had just begun to rise over Tucson, painting the sky in strokes of pale gold and blue. It was the kind of morning that felt sacred without needing words. Maria met him at the entrance, her voice low. He's inside. He wanted to wait for you, alone. Keanu nodded, adjusting his jacket before stepping through the open doors. The chapel was small and simple, the wooden pews polished from years of prayer. Candles flickered near the altar, their flames steady despite the faint draft that crept through the old windows. At the far end of the aisle sat Miguel, dressed neatly in a white shirt and jeans that were slightly too big for him. He held a small envelope in his hands, clutching it tightly as if afraid it might blow away. When he saw Keanu, his face brightened, but his eyes were already glistening with emotion. You came, Miguel said, his voice a mix of relief and sadness. Of course I did, Keanu replied softly, walking closer. I wouldn't miss this. Miguel looked down at the envelope, tracing its edges with his fingers. I made something for you, he said, so you won't forget me. Keanu smiled faintly and sat beside him in the pew. I don't think I could forget you even if I tried. The boy took a deep breath, then handed over the envelope. Keanu opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing colored with the same crayons from the center, showing a man standing under a desert sky filled with stars. Next to him was a small boy holding a backpack, both surrounded by a soft halo of light. Above them, Miguel had written in shaky letters, You saved my life without a gun. Keanu's throat tightened as he looked at the picture. It's beautiful, he said quietly. You've got a real gift, you know that? Miguel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. You didn't have to help me, but you did. Keanu folded the drawing carefully, holding it close to his chest. You helped yourself too, Miguel. You ran when it mattered most. You believed you could live. That's what saved you. The boy's voice cracked. But you didn't leave me. Keanu shook his head gently. No. Sometimes the hardest thing is not leaving when everyone else would. You reminded me why that matters. They sat in silence for a while, the sunlight slowly creeping through the stained glass windows. The chapel bells began to ring again, soft and clear, marking the hour. Miguel turned toward him, his voice barely above a whisper. Are you going to miss me? Keanu smiled, eyes warm. Every day. Miguel pressed his lips together, trying not to cry again. Maria said, I'll have a big room in Texas, he said, his voice small, with a window that faces the sunrise and flowers in the backyard. I told Mrs. Parker I want to plant roses like my mom had. Keanu nodded. She'll like that, and you'll have plenty of space to draw, too. Miguel smiled faintly. I already started one for them, but I wanted you to have the first one. He glanced at the folded paper in Keanu's hand. So you remember what it looked like that night, the stars, the wind, everything. Keanu looked at him thoughtfully. I don't need a picture to remember that. I'll remember how brave you were. The boy lowered his gaze. I wasn't brave. I was scared the whole time. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his tone gentle but firm. That's what bravery is, Miguel. Being scared, but still moving forward. For a moment, the boy didn't speak. Then he nodded slowly, as if the words were something he would keep with him for the rest of his life. The sound of a car engine drifted in from the courtyard. The Parkers were waiting by the gate, the morning light glinting off their windshield. Maria stood beside them, speaking quietly to one of the mission workers. The time had come. Miguel turned back toward Keanu, his eyes wide and uncertain. Will I see you again? Keanu smiled, though his heart felt heavy. Maybe not soon, but I'll always know where you are, and you'll always know where to find me. Right here. He touched his chest, lightly, over his heart. Miguel did the same, mirroring the gesture. Right here, he whispered. Keanu stood, and the boy followed. They walked side by side down the aisle toward the open door. Outside, the sky had brightened, casting long golden rays across the courtyard. The mission bells began to ring again, softer this time, almost like a blessing. At the gate, Elaine knelt to greet Miguel, brushing a strand of hair from his face. Ready, sweetheart? She asked gently. Miguel nodded, then looked back one last time. Keanu was standing near the chapel steps, his hands in his pockets, the folded drawing tucked safely inside his jacket. The boy ran back suddenly and threw his arms around him. Thank you, he whispered, his voice trembling, for not being afraid. Keanu bent down and hugged him tightly, his voice low and steady. You don't need to thank me, Miguel. Just promise me you'll keep believing in good people. I will, the boy said. The car door opened, and Miguel climbed in beside Elaine. Robert gave Keanu a grateful nod before driving slowly down the dirt road that led away from the mission. The tires stirred up a faint cloud of dust that shimmered in the sunlight like gold. Keanu stood there until the car disappeared over the ridge. The desert was quiet again, broken only by the soft ring of the chapel bell echoing across the valley. He took the folded drawing from his jacket, looked at it once more, and smiled faintly. The stars Miguel had drawn seemed to glow under the morning light. In that silence, he felt the peace that comes when hope refuses to die. The studio lights felt almost foreign after so many quiet days in the desert. When Keanu stepped back onto the set, the familiar hum of cameras and chatter of crew members filled the air. Everyone greeted him with warmth, but beneath the surface was a different kind of curiosity. They'd all heard fragments of the story, rumors of a rescue near the border, whispers of danger, headlines that never named him but somehow pointed in his direction. Hey man, one of the camera operators said, grinning as Keanu passed. Glad to see you made it back. Heard you've been doing your own stunts off-set. Keanu chuckled lightly, adjusting the strap on his bag. Something like that. The director, a veteran filmmaker named Alan Pierce, waved him over. We're ready for the last act, Keanu. Take your time, though. You've had quite a break. Keanu nodded, walking toward his mark under the hot lights. The scene they were filming that day was simple, on paper, a confrontation between two characters at sunset, but it carried the emotional weight of the entire film. His co-star, a young actor named David, leaned against the prop railing, smirking. "Ready to outact the rest of us again?" David joked. Keanu smiled faintly. "Not today. Today, I'm just telling the truth." When the camera rolled, something in his performance felt different, subtler, more lived in. His gestures were slower, his pauses deeper. The dialogue about forgiveness and strength no longer felt like lines from a script. They were echoes of something real, something he'd lived beneath the desert stars. When Alan called cut, the room went quiet for a moment before breaking into quiet applause. The director stared at the monitor, his voice hushed. "That was different, Keanu. Raw. Whatever happened out there, keep it." Keanu nodded once. "Don't worry, I can't lose it." During lunch break, the cast and crew gathered around a table outside. The air buzzed with laughter. But every now and then, someone would glance at him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. A production assistant, nervous but eager, finally asked, "Is it true what they're saying? That you helped someone across the border?" Keanu took a sip of his coffee before answering. "People say a lot of things." "So, you won't confirm or deny?" the assistant pressed. He smiled gently. "Some stories aren't meant to be told, not by the ones who live them." David, sitting beside him, chuckled. "That's the most Keanu answer ever." The table erupted in laughter, easing the tension. But Keanu's gaze drifted quietly toward the horizon beyond the studio lot. The sky reminded him of the Arizona dusk, the same muted colors, the same calm before nightfall. He thought of Miguel's drawing, tucked safely in his journal at home, the boy's words still etched into his memory. "You saved my life without a gun." He hadn't saved anyone. Not really. He'd simply been there when someone needed to be seen. And maybe that was enough. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the studio walls, Keanu sat alone on a folding chair near the edge of the set. The crew had wrapped for the day, and the lot was quiet except for the distant hum of generators. He opened his worn leather journal, the same one he carried during every production, and began to write. His handwriting was slow and deliberate. The greatest roles aren't in movies. They're in moments where no one's watching. He paused, letting the ink dry before continuing. Sometimes, the script is real. Sometimes, the lines save someone's life. He closed the notebook gently and leaned back, watching the sky darken into shades of violet and gray. The desert stars would be visible soon, different from two suns, but bright enough to stir a memory. Alan Pierce walked up behind him quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you're somewhere else," he said, handing him one. "Maybe I am?" Keanu replied with a faint smile. "But I'll find my way back." Alan took a seat beside him, sighing. "I've worked with a lot of actors in my life. They all come back from breaks, either better or broken. You came back, changed." Keanu glanced at him. "Change isn't always bad." "No," Alan said. "Sometimes it's what the story needs." He hesitated before adding, "We're thinking of adding a dedication at the end of the film. Something simple. For those still running from fear, may you find someone who listens." "What do you think?" Keanu looked down at his cup, then back at the fading light. "I think that's perfect." Alan nodded, sensing there was more behind those words than Keanu would ever say. "You know," he said, smiling faintly, "people are going to wonder where that line came from." "Let them wonder," Keanu replied softly. "Some truths are quieter when they stay unspoken." The next few days on set passed quickly. Each scene carried a new kind of honesty that others noticed, but didn't question. His co-star David teased him between takes, saying, "You've been method acting off screen, haven't you?" Keanu just smiled. "You could say that." When the film finally wrapped, the crew celebrated with laughter, toasts, and the usual chaos of the final night. Cameras flashed, people hugged, and plans for future projects filled the air. But Keanu stayed off to the side, watching them with quiet contentment. He didn't feel apart from it, just more aware of what truly mattered beyond it. Later, when the movie premiered months down the line, the audience sat breathless during the credits. The dedication appeared in white letters against a black screen. For those still running from fear, may you find someone who listens. The crowd had no idea who it referred to. To them, it was just another poetic tribute. But to Keanu, sitting silently in the back of the theater, it was something sacred, a promise kept. Outside afterward, as flashbulbs flickered and reporters called his name, he simply smiled, waved, and disappeared into the night. He didn't need the questions, the fame, or the spotlight. He had already lived the kind of story that never makes it to the screen, the kind that changes a life without the world ever knowing. The year passed quietly, as years often do when the noise fades and the soul begins to rest. For Keanu, life had returned to its steady rhythm of film sets, interviews, and the soft hum of ordinary days. But every now and then, something would stir beneath the calm. A flash of desert wind in his memory, a glimpse of a star-filled sky, or the faint echo of a young boy's laughter carried on the edge of thought. One afternoon, while rehearsing lines in his Los Angeles home, the doorbell rang. Laura's voice called from the hallway. "Something came for you from Tucson. It's from Maria." Keanu walked over, taking the envelope she held. The paper was worn, the handwriting on the front neat but familiar. Inside was another envelope, smaller, sealed with care. On the corner, in uneven blue ink, were two words that made his chest tighten. From Miguel. He moved to the piano room before opening it. The afternoon light streamed through the tall windows, spilling across the black and white keys. He sat for a moment, the envelope resting between his fingers, as if breaking the seal would change something that needed to remain untouched. Finally, he unfolded it. The letter was written on lined paper from a school notebook, the handwriting slightly crooked but clear. "Dear Keanu, it's been a long time. I am in school now, and I like it. My English is better. I can read books without help sometimes. My teachers are nice, and I made new friends. I also started learning guitar. Mr. Parker says I have a good ear for music. He lets me play in the evenings when the sun goes down. I wrote a song. It's about hope. I think you would like it." Keanu smiled faintly, reading on. "Mrs. Parker planted roses in the backyard, just like I said. They smell good when it rains. I help her with the garden after school. Sometimes we talk about my mom. I still miss her, but it doesn't hurt as much anymore. She used to say angels come when you least expect. I think maybe she sent you that night." The next line stopped him cold. "You were the first person to tell me I could be a good person." His hand stilled on the page. He read it again, slower this time, the words echoing in the quiet room. Something deep within him stirred a warmth that wasn't pride, but gratitude. Gratitude for having crossed paths with a life that reminded him what goodness really meant. The rest of the letter was filled with small updates. Miguel helping other kids at the center. When he visited with Maria, sharing his crayons, teaching them English words, and drawing pictures of places that feel safe. The letter ended simply, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. I will keep trying to be the person you believed I could be. Your friend, Miguel." Keanu folded the paper slowly, his throat tightening. Keanu set the letter down on the piano, his fingers tracing the creases as though afraid the words might fade if he looked away. Outside the window, the sky was deepening into sunset. The clouds brushed with pink and amber hues that reminded him of the Arizona horizon. It felt like the same light that had followed them through the desert that night, quiet and eternal. He unfolded the letter again, reading the last line once more. "You were the first person to tell me I could be a good person." The simplicity of it hit him harder than anything else ever had. In that one sentence, he heard everything the boy had carried: fear, shame, doubt, and everything he'd finally learned to let go of. He thought of all the times in his own life when someone had believed in him before he knew how to believe in himself. His mother's gentle guidance, his sister's unwavering support, the strangers who'd shown kindness when he least deserved it. And now, somehow, he had become that person for someone else. He turned toward the piano, lowering the lid gently before sitting down. The polished keys reflected the soft light from the window. He let his fingers rest there, motionless for a few seconds, then pressed one note, a low, resonant C. The sound lingered, filling the room with warmth. Then another note followed, and another, until a melody began to form. It wasn't planned, it wasn't rehearsed. It flowed naturally, like a whisper from the heart. Each note carried a memory. The first time he'd seen Miguel hiding behind the crates, the way the boy had trembled when he reached out his hand, the sound of his laughter in the mission courtyard, the smell of roses in the backyard he'd never seen but could now imagine. The melody rose and fell, gentle but searching, like a prayer that didn't need words. He closed his eyes as he played, and the music deepened, becoming something between longing and peace. The final chords lingered in the air, long after his fingers stopped moving. Keanu sat still, listening to the silence that followed. Outside, the last of the sunlight slipped below the horizon, leaving behind only the glow of the city lights. He reached for the letter again and placed it on the piano's music stand, right above the keys. The paper fluttered slightly as the evening breeze moved through the half-open window. Laura's voice echoed faintly from the hallway. "Keanu, you okay?" He turned slightly, his tone soft. "Yeah, I'm good." But even as he said it, he felt something deeper than good. A quiet sense of fulfillment, of having done something that mattered beyond himself. He glanced at the letter one last time, then began to play again, slower this time, letting the notes drift into the night. The music wasn't a performance. It was a conversation with the desert, with the boy, with every soul still running from fear. The melody ended unresolved, the last chord open and tender, as if to say the story wasn't over yet. Keanu looked toward the horizon, whispering to the fading light, "Keep believing, Miguel." And somewhere far away, under the same sky, a boy with a guitar might have been playing the same tune, soft, hopeful, unfinished. The Texas sun had a different warmth than the desert. It didn't sting, it embraced. Miguel stood on the porch of his new home, the scent of roses drifting from the garden he and Mrs. Parker had planted months earlier. The house was quiet, except for the hum of a wind chime, swaying gently near the door. He closed his eyes, breathing in the calm. It still amazed him sometimes that this peace was his now. Inside, the sound of laughter echoed from the kitchen. Robert Parker was helping Elaine prepare food for the upcoming school event. Miguel peeked through the doorway. "You need help?" he asked. Elaine turned, her smile bright. "You, young man, are supposed to be practicing your speech." Miguel groaned softly but smiled back. "I've said it 100 times already." "Then make it 101, Robert teased, passing him a glass of lemonade. "You'll thank us when the nerves hit." Miguel rolled his eyes good-naturedly and walked to his room. On the desk, by the window, sat his guitar, a few school books, and a framed photo of him with the Parkers on their first day as a family. Next to it was something he kept hidden most days, a folded drawing carefully preserved in a small wooden box, the drawing of the man under the desert stars. He unfolded it sometimes, like now, when he needed courage. Keanu's calm face under the moonlight, the stars above them, the faint words written in his own shaky handwriting. "You saved my life without a gun." He smiled softly. "You'd laugh if you saw me now," he whispered, "talking in front of people instead of hiding." That afternoon, the school auditorium buzzed with excitement. Parents, teachers, and students filled the seats as banners, reading Voices of Courage hung across the walls. Miguel sat backstage, clutching the note cards Maria had helped him write when she visited last month. She had flown down from Arizona to see him perform, proud of how far he had come. "You ready, mijo?" she asked gently. Miguel nodded, a little scared. Maria smiled. "That means your heart's awake. Remember what we talked about. Speak like you're talking to one person who needs to hear it. He took a deep breath. I think I know who that is. When his name was called, he walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, almost blinding, but the applause from the audience grounded him. He found his mark at the microphone and looked out into the crowd. The Parkers waved from the front row. Maria sat near them, her hands clasped. He began slowly, his accent soft but clear. When I was younger, I thought courage meant fighting. I thought it meant being stronger than the people who hurt you. The audience leaned in, drawn to the honesty in his tone. But I learned something different, Miguel continued. Courage isn't loud, it's quiet. It's the voice that says, I'll keep going, even when you're afraid. It's helping someone instead of hurting them. It's believing in kindness when the world tells you not to. He paused, taking a breath. The crowd was silent. Miguel looked down at his note cards but didn't read from them. The words were already alive in his heart. He raised his head again, his voice steadier now. I met someone once who showed me that kind of courage, he said. He didn't use strength to fight back. He used kindness. When I was scared, he didn't yell or tell me to be brave. He just stood beside me. Sometimes that's all a person needs to not be alone. He swallowed hard, his eyes glimmering under the stage lights. He told me that running doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're still fighting. And he was right. Because I ran towards something better, not away from it. There was a soft murmur from the audience, parents nodding, teachers leaning forward, a few people wiping their eyes. Miguel took a deep breath, his voice growing stronger. Sometimes the strongest people are those who refuse to hurt others, he said, even when they've been hurt themselves. The silence that followed was deep and reverent. Then, as if a wave had passed through the room, applause began to rise. It wasn't loud or hurried, it was full of emotion, spreading from one person to another until the entire auditorium was clapping. Maria wiped her eyes as she stood, clapping the hardest. The Parkers were on their feet too, pride shining in their faces. Miguel bowed his head slightly, humbled by the response, then stepped away from the microphone. When he reached backstage, a journalist from a local newspaper was waiting, holding a notepad. She spoke kindly, careful not to overwhelm him. That was a powerful speech, Miguel. You have a gift with words. Would you mind if I ask who inspired you? Miguel hesitated, glancing at Maria, who gave him a small, reassuring nod. There was a man who helped me when I was in trouble, Miguel said. He didn't want anything in return. He just wanted me to be safe. The journalist smiled. Was it true what someone mentioned earlier? That he was an actor? Miguel smiled faintly. Yes, but he doesn't want fame. He wants peace. The journalist's pen stopped mid-word. Peace? Miguel nodded. He said the world already has too much noise, so I think he'd want me to talk about kindness instead. Her expression softened. That's a beautiful answer. Miguel looked toward the crowd again, where the students were laughing and clapping for the next speaker. He told me once that we can all be good people if we keep believing it's possible. I think that's what I want to tell others too. The journalist tucked her notepad away. You already are. Later that evening, when the event ended and the crowd thinned, Miguel sat alone on the empty stage, his legs dangling over the edge. Maria joined him quietly, handing him a paper cup of lemonade. You did something special today, she said. Miguel looked up at her. Do you think he'd be proud? Maria smiled. I think he already is. He glanced toward the open doors where the sun was setting, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and pink. The same colors he remembered from that night in the desert. Somewhere, he thought, the man who had saved him might be watching that same sky. The story might have ended with Miguel's new life, but in truth, it was only beginning. What happened in the desert had rippled outward, reaching places Keanu never intended it to go. Maria Torres, moved by everything that had unfolded, began to expand her advocacy network. She joined forces with Laura Miller, whose organizational skill and quiet persistence gave their vision structure. Together they created something larger than either had imagined, the Reeves Initiative, a cross-border rescue program for children in danger. They didn't tell Keanu until it was official. When Laura visited him one morning at his home, she handed him a simple folder. Inside were the registration papers, a mission statement, and a small printed logo. A stylized windmill under a starry sky. Keanu stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "The Reeves Initiative?" he said finally, looking up. Laura smiled faintly. Maria insisted. "I told her you'd argue about it, but she said the name wasn't about you, it was about what you represent." He shook his head slowly. "You could have called it anything." "We could have," she said, "but names matter. Yours reminds people that fame doesn't have to mean distance. It can mean responsibility." He leaned back in his chair, sighing softly. "You two don't make things easy." Laura grinned. "You didn't exactly take the easy road either." Within months, the initiative took root in both Arizona and northern Mexico. Its mission was simple but profound: provide safe passage, education, and legal aid for at-risk minors caught between borders. Volunteers, many of them former law enforcement officers, teachers, and doctors, joined the cause. Shelters were built, partnerships formed, and for the first time in years, hope began to outshine fear in places where both had been scarce. Keanu never appeared in photos or public briefings. When reporters asked if the actor was involved, Maria always answered the same way, with a patient smile and a simple phrase: "He believes kindness can be louder than fear." Under that quiet philosophy, the initiative grew. It helped rescue more than 50 children in its first year alone. Some were reunited with families. Others found new homes, like Miguel's, where safety didn't depend on luck. The media eventually picked up the story. Photos of Maria at the border checkpoints, holding children's hands, spread across newspapers and online headlines. In one interview, a journalist pressed her for more details about the program's benefactor. Maria hesitated for a moment, then said, "He asked for silence, not recognition. So, the best I can give him is proof that his silence still saves lives." The reporter lowered her pen. "Then what do you call that kind of influence?" Maria smiled gently. "I call it light." When the segment aired, the closing shot was of a windmill turning slowly against the sunset, its shadow stretching long across the desert floor. Few people watching would realize that windmill actually existed, or that one quiet man would soon return to it, alone, just as he'd found it a year before. The Arizona desert was silent again, just as it had been that first night. The same windmill stood tall against the horizon, its blades creaking softly in the dry breeze. Keanu walked across the familiar stretch of sand, his boots pressing faint prints into the dust. The air was warm but still, carrying only the faint hum of insects and the whisper of the wind moving through the sagebrush. He stopped beside the old fence, where he had once left his jacket and hat, the decoy that had fooled Raphael's men. The post was still there, worn and weathered by time, the wood cracked but standing. He placed his hand on it gently, as though greeting an old friend. The memory of that night came back vividly: the roar of engines, the shimmer of moonlight on the sand, Miguel's frightened eyes looking up at him in the dark. So much had changed since then. The boy was safe now. Maria and Laura had turned his small act of compassion into something far greater than he could have ever built himself. Yet, standing there, he realized it wasn't the scale of the outcome that mattered. It was the seed that had started it all, a choice made in silence, without expectation. He looked toward the horizon, the sun beginning to dip low, painting the desert gold. The light caught the edges of the windmill blades, making them glow like slow-turning halos. "Thank you for showing me him," Keanu whispered, his voice barely carried by the wind. "He reminded me why people still matter." The breeze picked up for a moment, swirling dust around his feet. It felt almost like an answer, soft, invisible, but real. He stayed there for a long while, watching the light fade. Then, as the first stars appeared, he took a small folded paper from his jacket pocket. It was worn from handling, the edges creased, but the drawing still clear. The man and the boy under the desert sky. He set it down by the fence post, pressing a small stone over it so it wouldn't blow away. "You don't need me anymore, kid," he murmured. "But I'll always keep this night." As he turned to leave, headlights appeared far in the distance. 2 vehicles from the Reeves Initiative convoy, heading toward a new shelter site near the border. The wind carried the faint laughter of children from somewhere unseen, the sound soft and fleeting but enough to make him smile. He walked back toward his car, the desert stretching endlessly behind him. The stars above grew brighter, untouched and endless. Before getting in, he looked back one last time at the windmill turning slowly under the sky. For a moment it almost looked like a beacon, a reminder that goodness, once set in motion, doesn't stop. He whispered one last thought into the night, more to himself than to anyone listening. Maybe the world doesn't need heroes. Maybe it just needs people who don't look away. Then he started the engine, the headlights cutting a path through the darkness. Behind him, the windmill kept turning, steady and unbroken, a symbol of everything that endures when kindness takes root. The desert night returned in silence, just as it had begun. But this time there was no chase, no fear, no shadows closing in. Only the wind moving gently through the tall grass and the quiet hum of the old windmill turning beneath the stars. Keanu stood beside his car, the headlights dimmed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The same sky stretched above him, the same endless canvas Miguel once looked up at with trembling hope. He thought of all that had happened since that night, the boy's small hand gripping his sleeve. The way the rosary had glimmered faintly in the dark when Miguel showed it to him, a symbol of faith carried through danger. The letters that had come later, words written with uneven care but overflowing with strength. Each piece of the story, fragile yet unbreakable, had become part of something bigger than either of them. His voice was quiet, steady, as if he were speaking to the wind itself. The world doesn't change when we shout louder. It changes when we kneel beside someone afraid and say, "You're safe now." The simplicity of the truth lingered. It wasn't about fame or power or even recognition. It was about choosing empathy when indifference was easier, about finding the courage to protect without destroying, to heal instead of punish. Keanu walked slowly back toward the fence post, where the drawing rested beneath the stone. The paper had faded slightly from the sun, but the figure still stood himself and the boy beneath a sky full of stars. He touched the edge gently, then smiled. "You did it, Miguel," he whispered. "You made it home." A breeze swept across the desert, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and the sound of the fenchel windmill turning. It was the same rhythm he had heard that night, now softer, more forgiving. He closed his eyes, remembering the look on Miguel's face when they said goodbye at the chapel, the innocence returned to a child who had almost lost it. Remembering Laura's determination, Maria's steady faith, and Hank's quiet strength. Each of them had played a part. None of them had sought the spotlight. Kindness, he realized, didn't need an audience. It needed only a moment of courage. He turned toward the car, but before leaving, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the rosary Miguel had left behind months ago, a small silver cross, worn smooth from years of holding. He tied it gently around the fence post, letting it hang there against the desert wind. It glimmered faintly in the fading light, a promise left behind for whoever came next. The windmill turned once more, creaking softly, like a heartbeat echoing through the valley. Keanu watched it, his expression calm, his eyes reflecting the last streaks of daylight. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the weight of the world, only the quiet peace of knowing he had done something that mattered, even if no one else would ever know. The stars began to appear one by one, faint pinpricks of light across the wide sky. Keanu leaned against his car, his hands in his pockets, listening to the steady whisper of the windmill behind him. The world felt vast again, empty yet alive, just as it had the night he first met Miguel. But this time, there was no fear in the emptiness, only gratitude. He thought about everything the boy had taught him without ever realizing it. The way hope could survive in a child's heart, even when everything else seemed lost. The way compassion could travel farther than any border. And how sometimes the smallest act, a single word of reassurance, could ripple outward until it touched countless lives. In his mind, he could still hear Miguel's laughter, faint but clear, and the strumming of a guitar somewhere in Texas. He could picture Maria at her desk, surrounded by files and photos of rescued children, working tirelessly with Laura to give them all another chance. He imagined Hank tending the ranch again, Shadow trotting at his side, keeping watch over whoever might need help next. The Reeves initiative was growing, but Keanu didn't think of it as his. It belonged to everyone who had refused to look away. Every volunteer, every child saved, every hand extended in quiet defiance of cruelty. That, he realized, was the true measure of legacy, not in buildings or headlines, but in hearts that kept choosing kindness. He opened the car door, pausing before getting in. His gaze lifted once more to the rosary tied to the fence post. It shimmered faintly beneath the starlight, swinging gently in the wind. It was no longer a symbol of fear, it had become a symbol of faith. He whispered softly, "For every child still running, may they find someone who listens." The desert remained silent, but somehow, the air seemed to hold the words. As he drove away, the headlights swept across the sand, and for a fleeting moment, it looked like the ground itself glowed every grain of dust, reflecting a trace of starlight, like countless small lives connected by the same unseen thread. Far away, in a small Texas town, a boy with dark hair sat on his bed, strumming a guitar in the soft glow of a lamp. His song drifted out through an open window, rising into the warm night air. It was simple, tender, and full of light, the same melody Keanu had once played alone in his home. The music crossed the distance between them, quiet but powerful, like a prayer shared between souls. Back in the desert, Keanu smiled as he drove, hearing that music somewhere deep inside. The stars seemed closer now, brighter, as if the sky itself were listening. The story of that night would never make the news, and that was how it should be. Some moments weren't meant to be told. They were meant to live quietly in the people they changed, in the hope they left behind. The screen fades slowly to black, and his voice lingers one last time. Kindness doesn't need applause. It just needs a beginning. Then the final question appears for the viewers. Have you ever met someone who restored your faith in humanity? What kind of stories about kindness would you like to see next on this channel?